Welcome to All About Business with me, James Reed, the podcast that covers everything about business, management, and leadership. Every episode, I sit down with different guests who've bootstrapped companies, masterminded investment models, or built a business empire. They're leaders in their field, and they're here to give you top insights and actionable advice so that you can apply their ideas to your own career or business venture. Welcome to All About Business Shorts, where I'm joined by journalist, entrepreneur, and CEO Sue Douglas. In this episode, Sue speaks to me about the blood scandal that shocked a nation.
So I got lucky because at that point, one of my old friends from my days on the medical magazine said, "Oh, Sue, I've got this really interesting story, I think, but it needs to be done in a big newspaper and not on a medical magazine because no one's going to take any notice, and it's already cropped up in the Lancet and the medical press." So we're having cocktails in Covent Garden. I said, "What is it?" He said, "Well, I went to this conference the other day. Let's think about this. Is this a story? I think it is. And the blood that we're using in Britain is potentially contaminated with all sorts of nasties. And this AIDS thing that's just appeared, it could be in that too." Now, there were some hematologists, says my friend, at a conference I had to go to the other day, who peeled off and in the bar where I was as well, were saying they were really worried. What do you think? Because if I did it in the medical magazine, no one's going to take any notice. It's just a possibility. But maybe if you do it, and you did it on the Mail on Sunday with millions of readers mid-market, it would make a difference. So I said, who was the one that you saw who was worried? Do you think he would talk to me? She said, "Well, I don't know. If you're not medical press, you'd probably be scared." So this is important, again, back to me being contrarian and not necessarily playing by the rules. And I would say advice for quite a lot of people is sometimes you do have to break rules. So I got the number for him, the telephone number, and he was working at a big teaching hospital in Wales. And I'm not going to say more because I've swore to him I would never reveal who he was, and I haven't to this day, despite the public inquiry that's just happened now. And I phoned him up and I said, I wasn't there at the conference, but I gather from a couple of other hematologists that I know, so I didn't say I wasn't one or was one, that you're really concerned about the blood that we're importing into the UK for routine transfusions and for blood products. Long silence. "So can I come and talk to you? Because I'm really worried about it as well." So I still haven't said who I was. And I went off, and now, as I say, I've just got the job as medical correspondent. I'm 25 years old, and I'm on this new newspaper. And I got lucky because he told me that he was really concerned. And amongst other, I went to see him at the hospital, and he just opened up and told me about some of the things that were really worrying him, that hepatitis C, which we all knew about, could be transmitted through blood, was one real potential because we weren't screening it, and the Swiss and other people were beginning to heat treat blood. We could do that, but we weren't doing it, and we were importing because we weren't self-sufficient. And where were we importing? And then I found out, some good newspaper journalism, that we were importing from America, and that people were being paid, people on the street, drug addicts and people who were homeless and prisoners. So then he said, so the possibility is, and I know this is happening, is that the AIDS virus, and we didn't know at this point, this is 1983, what really was causing AIDS, but we knew the route of transmission was blood, and largely through homosexuals and needle abuse, shared needles with people taking drugs on the street. And he said, "I'm really scared." So I thought, okay. So I did about 2 weeks digging. Again, as I say, got really lucky. And the story was true. And the problem was that really nobody knew what to do about it. So at that point, because I'm quite young and pushy, probably, I remember seeing health ministers, and Ken Clarke in particular, and Norman Fowler and various other civil servants, and saying, "Are you worried?" Well, Sue, the thing is, they would say, we're not self-sufficient, and David Owen has started this great project, the Elstree Laboratories, and it's going to cost us, I think it was 8 million comes to mind, but it can't have been that little, before we're self-sufficient, and that's going to be in 2 or 3 years. So meanwhile, we're importing this blood, and it's fine. It's American, and, it's okay. So I went back to my source, and I several times, and he said, well, I think, I can give you some other contacts. By now, I'm thinking he probably knows I'm not actually...
Well, I was going to ask, has he worked out that you're a journalist
I'm
at this
clearly
point?
Not a haematologist. But he hadn't actually twigged, and I hadn't published anything. Then I come back to the office in Fleet Street, and I say, right, I've really got this story wrapped up now, and the lawyers were all over it, and the editor was all over it, and we published. And the headline was huge in 64 point, or something even bigger, hospitals using killer blood. Before we published, I phoned him up and I said, I'm reading you the whole thing, listen. And he said, yep. So I said, are you happy? Because I'm actually a journalist, not a haematologist. And he laughed and he said, I knew you weren't a haematologist.
Right. So the headline was true.
The headline was true. I said, are you happy with me to run this? He said, never, ever come and see me again because my job is in jeopardy. And never, ever tell anyone who I am, but I'll continue to help you. Now, 40 years on, there's a public inquiry this year that's resulted in massive compensation, but
no one's received this yet, have they? I mean, this is 40 years later, and in other countries, people have been
absolutely,
compensated.
and people went to prison for lying.
Yeah, and in
we
this country, we still haven't.
Well, for 10 years, at least 10 years, we continued to have that same blood, and because we weren't actually self-sufficient. And there were things about human nature. Again, you saying, getting up in the morning. By this point, I'm loving what I'm doing, but it's scary because unless I'd had around me the support, which is really about the culture of where you're working and you're not a lone wolf and you do feel that you're doing this together, I could never have done it. And the press council ruled against me, saying that I was sensationalist, irresponsible, and exposed people, if they didn't take their blood products or refused transfusion, they could die. And that was true. But 3,500 people have died to date. So
one of whom was my former boss, Anita Roddick,
yes,
who went public about this.
Yeah.
So, it's a terrible episode.
A terrible episode, but again, back to your question, what gets you up in the morning? If you think you can ever do that, even on the smallest level, that you might just make people think, back to, me never daring to say to, Miss, why? If people aren't allowed to say that, or there isn't, without going on about a free press, but democracy, and that you are allowed to ask questions and that you do have people around you to question what's going on. To me, that was the most important thing. So it was validation. There have been lots of fallow periods in my career when I've never done anything like that, but it's really important.
So you broke this big story. This was 40 years ago, and it's still a big story.
Yeah.
With this recent inquiry and people still seeking and expecting compensation, rightly so.
Yes, and rightly so. But again, I'm still in touch with some of them because I've felt very strongly that you don't just forget when something like that happens. And so one of the guys who I've been talking to for the last year, really since the inquiry was first announced, said to me, I really hope that the public, people aren't going to think that we're money grabbing and that, this is about me having enough money to buy an Aston Martin and go on a holiday. He said, my life has been ruined and I've lost a brother and a father to this. And no money can compensate for that. And I said, well, what does? He said, it'd be really great if someone said sorry.
Yeah.
And it would be even better, Sue, if together we could work out a way where we could maybe make it never happen again. And you think about all the other public inquiries about Stephen Lawrence or about, the public inquiry into what on earth happened, within the police, that someone could actually pick up and murder a girl. Trust. And I think it's really, really important to have a mechanism to be able to talk to people and actually say, is this right? Beyond the establishment.